Where did this podcast go? Was there some sort of crazy accident? Did I stage dive off of a table at a small bar where there was no need for that much energy going on, and I'm recovering from a nearly fatal accident? Did Jay get bitten by a radioactive saxophone and is now fighting crime as the one and only Reed Man? Either way, we're very excited about this one. This will be one you will want to check out.
3, 5.
Make some noise!
Welcome to Making Noise. Thank you for being here. My name is Todd Johnson. Jay Connor is in the conversation with me on this interview as well. He's not here with me right now, but our interview today is a very special episode, very, very special episode. This interview is with Chris Garges. So before we hop in the episode, though, I wanted to say a few things. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for your support, interacting with us, emailing us, the feedback. Everything's been great on this. We never expected the success of this show. Obviously, it's not. We're not the biggest podcast in the world or the state or anywhere really. We're just excited that it even gets a download. But I do have to say it is really fascinating. We were not expecting people to love and support the show the way that you have. So everybody, we really appreciate it. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for buying stuff in the merch store. Thank you. Like we were never expecting this sort of thing to happen. So thank you so much. And we're very proud to do it for sure. So thank you. Where did we go? In all honesty, I don't really want to get into that too much right now. There's two very big things that have kind of happened to me this year that we'll address later. For both of those kind of things, just kind of bigger life changes, I've also kind of taken a little bit of a social media hiatus. Still playing shows, still will kind of post about where I'm around, but just kind of working on a few things, including things with this show that we will be updating more at the beginning of 2022. So the show will go on, slightly different, nothing too crazy, but we're really excited about getting it going for you. But we just really want to. We were kind of taking a pause so that way we get things ready for it. So make sure to subscribe, and you'll see the other updates. But this was an episode we really wanted to do. We really wanted to get it out now for multiple reasons. Chris Garges is on the show today. He's the owner, operator of Old House Studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's a wonderful drummer, audio engineer, super talented guy. Really, really great dude. So really excited to talk to him. He's been part of putting out an album that's called Be Good to Yourself. Be Good to Yourself is an initiative to raise much needed awareness and funds to provide underinsured music industry professionals access to mental health care and substance abuse counseling services in times of crisis. Across North Carolina, music folks like musicians, sound engineers, stage staff, anybody in the business of supporting music are struggling with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. So the new record is Be Good to Yourself. And the way that you can help is by going to begoodtoyourselfmusic.com. You can read more about how they've allied themselves with Sims Foundation, Abundance NC. All of this money, everything that goes through this is affecting local musicians in your neighborhood. It is here to help any musician or any music people in this area with what they're doing. This is a amazing album. The list, the list of people, it's got Don Dixon, Mitch Easter, Rick Miller, Mary Huff, Caitlin Carey, so many people, Josh Daniel as well, Faith Jones, our friend Dan Hood, friend of the show, Dan Hood is on this record. There's so many wonderful people. And we get into the album and we talk about it, but I could tell you it's a really, really fantastic album. The music on it, much of the songs are written by North Carolina songwriters. Much of it is just covers about mental health and substance abuse, and some of it is just jamming out. There's a cover of Frankenstein from Edgar Winter that's just killer. The music is amazing. The cause is amazing. So really make sure to go check out begoodtoyourselfmusic.com. And Chris was a very integral part of this record, and so we talk about that. We talk about the record a lot, but also too, just to kind of let you know, Chris is one of those guys that when I first moved into Charlotte that I heard about all the time. There were a few touchstones from people that I would talk to, and one of the earliest ones was, well, you've got to go, if you're trying to meet musicians, you've got to go to Smokey Joe's Cafe on a Tuesday night, and everyone understands that's a Charlotte staple. But to me, in my opinion, Old House Studios is another Charlotte staple. So many people have talked to me about it, and I had heard of it, and I had heard of Chris long before I had met him, and then, later I did meet him and had the awesome opportunity to work on a project or two in his studio. Met many other people through him. We've in a group setting a time or two have gone out, grabbed drinks, and had conversations. But I've never really hung out with the guy too much, and it was just awesome to do that. It was such a great guy. He let me and Jay come into his studio. We really wanted to do it there because you can hear the sound of the room. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see all that, when we're kind of talking about some of the stuff. And it's just, I don't know. It was a great conversation. Couldn't have been nicer. So yeah, here's our interview with Chris Garges. Also make sure to check out begoodtoyourself.com. Make sure to check out this record. It's really, really good.
But no, y'all were talking about weird cover stuff though, and one of the things that I have discovered recently are the R&B covers of Fire and Rain. Okay, so one band, the Jackson 5.
Really?
Jackson 5 doing Fire and Rain live.
Huh.
Yeah, it's like on that. There's like a compilation of like them touring in like 1970 or something.
Yeah.
And one of the songs on there is that one. And then there's a whole cover song album by the Isley Brothers.
Oh, man.
That has Fire and Rain on it with this like kind of avant-garde, like for the time, especially like a recorded thing, vocal arrangement at the beginning of it, where they're doing all this harmonization, and then they do Fire and Rain.
Man, nothing like R&B groups from the 60s and 70s to just go, no, this is how this should be done.
Yeah, well,
like Sam Cooke and stuff. You know what I mean? Like his covers, you're just like, okay, well, I guess we're done.
It's funny too because I heard a Creedence song and it made me sort of think about some of those covers of Creedence things. And of course, the classic one is that everyone sort of thought that Proud Mary was originally by Ike and Tina Turner, and the Creedence covered it. It was the other way around,
True.
Yeah, it's funny how that stuff used to happen like a lot. Like there would be like a hit song that was immediately covered by somebody else, that also became a hit song
within like the same year.
Yeah. Oh, too. Totally. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think culturally some of that went towards sampling a little bit. I think you still kind of have like that covered nugget thing in there, but I think the fact that the business has gotten so much like, well, this is my 10%, this is my point on the song. It's probably turned that kind of stuff down a little bit. But yeah, no one's making any money in this on streaming, at least anyway. So it's like, why not kind of get into these things, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, it's weird now talking about covers. I feel like the cover market is kind of emerging massively now. If you're an artist who can do a cover that gets a sync deal.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like if you can cover, especially like right now it's super trendy like to cover 90s. So if you cover 90s, especially like a male grunge vocal song, and you're like an Americana indie female singer-songwriter vibe, if that's what the box that you're generally put into, that's like a massive market. It's so weird how it all kind of comes back around. But we can actually start this conversation at some point. So, Chris, thank you so much for having us here.
Oh, of course.
Being here in your studio at Old House. This is such an awesome place. If someone ever says to me, it's like, oh, well, studios in town or anything like that, it's like find Old House. Call Chris, talk to Chris, find an old
thanks.
house. Thank you so much for having us in here.
Oh yeah, well I'm happy to do it. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah. Well, and we wanted to do it in the live room because it's too cool. It's where all the guitars are. It's where everything's at.
Yeah.
It's way more fun. There's more toys around us.
Yeah. Not like there's anything wrong with the curtains at my house, but there's more guitars here.
You've been pulling off some pretty great podcasts for a while now. So
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. We're just
Thank
going to
you.
compliment each other this entire time.
It's all Todd. I have nothing to do with any of it.
And we're done. So,
well, thanks for being here.
no, thanks for okay. One quick nerdy question I had to ask.
Yeah.
Why are you on the Sennheiser when we're on the Bayer Dynamics? I'm curious.
The basic reason is because I was just sort of trying to figure out what mics I had that were kind of similar.
Okay.
And I kind of almost did the 421s, except that I'm recording some drums for a guy from Spain this week.
Okay.
And a couple of my other 421s are in that isolation booth on the drums right now.
Okay.
So and I actually do have 3 of those Bayer M88s, but one of them is about to go back to Bayer for repair right now. So.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to do the consistency thing, but I thought this might sort of work nice.
Yeah, and Jay will hopefully stop me if we start getting a little too nerdy. But I always want to ask about it's a rabbit hole we're going down. Your microphone collection. You were doing this for a long time. You still do it, like on your Instagram, where you post like an awesome snippet about like, this is what this microphone is. This is how I like to use it. This is how it was made. A little bit of the history of the microphone, and then like I've seen the pictures of your microphone collection is ridiculous.
It's pretty nuts.
Like,
yeah, I mean, like I'm a big microphone junkie, you know.
Yeah.
But to me, like microphones, it's that sort. Like once you get it all starts with the person playing the instrument in the space. It's like the person playing the instrument, and then the sound of the instrument. Mm-hmm. That's the most important thing, and then performance is obviously so the person performing on the instrument, the sound of the instrument in the space that it's in, and then that has to get captured. And the first thing in the electrical recording chain is the microphone. So if you get the microphone, the type of microphone and the placement right, then you kind of don't really need to do much of anything else to it. I mean, the mic preamp becomes like, it's kind of an important part too, but it really starts with the microphone. And I could just sort of go on and on about microphones for a while. But yeah, so I mean, I've been buying microphones for a really long time, and I don't have too many like super exotic like $5,000 microphones, but I've kind of everything sort of below that. Like I've got like a lot of, and anything that's sort of utilitarian, like the 421.
Right.
I've got like a handful of those, and the Bayer M88s. I've got a handful of those, and certain things like that, you know. But sort of like all the classic kind of workhorse microphones I've got.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. No, your mic list is, you know, we've talked about this before and stuff. You have a really good eye for kind of in like a behind the scenes of what is kind of like a standard. Not like there's should be a standard or whatever it is, but you know, whenever you see like a studio spec sheet of their gear, you not only for your mics, but you know, the instruments you have, the board you have, and what is the console that you run?
The console is an AMEC Angela that was made in 1991.
Okay.
It's made in Islington, England.
Okay.
It's a 36 channel analog mixing console.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I mean, like everything that you have it is a classic, like really good classic studio spec sheet of this is everything that you could ever want or need to get the job done. Plus, like all these extra little things in there that you got as well that are just fun little trinkets around that can kind of, and I love that about being in a studio. If I could, you know, and working in places, okay, cool. We've got the standards that we know that we can play with and stuff, but you also have so many like, what was the Batman line? And there's like, why does he have all those fantastic toys? You know, it's like there's all these little toys around in here that just kind of add and fuel to the creativity. So I just think the space is great, you know. But this wasn't, so I want to do a quick little bit of history, you know, and talk about all the kind of stuff you've done, but, and really about this space. But right now you're working on a record that is, can you tell us a little bit more about this record that's coming out in November?
November 8th.
November 8th.
The Be Good to Yourself record.
Yes.
Yeah. It's, it's really exciting. it sort of started out with some guys from Winston-Salem who were in a band called the Luxuriant Sedans that I did a few records for. And they wanted to do kind of like 10 songs, like all cover songs, just to raise some money to sort of help musicians with substance abuse and mental health issues. They were trying to sort of get some things going to raise money for primarily musicians who were uninsured, who had some issues with that.
Right.
And we got into this thing, and it got sort of really good right out of the gate. And we wound up getting some different singers in, some people from Winston-Salem, and then eventually some people that I had worked with. And we just sort of realized like what we had was kind of exceptional. And so it wound up morphing into this thing that's ultimately 27 songs.
Wow.
There's going to be a 23-song double CD, and then there's going to be a 10-song vinyl collection from the CD, and then there's going to be an additional 4-song EP that's not songs that aren't available on the CD.
So how many tracks total did y'all end up recording?
Well, we recorded like 29.
Oh, wow.
And wound up, like I said, there are going to be ultimately 27 that'll be released. But we wound up sort of, again, it was supposed to be just this little crew of us playing. Like I played drums on most of it. And then Ed Bumgardner from Winston-Salem played bass on all of it. And Rob Slater and Gino Grandinetti played guitar on most of it. And then we had a bunch of other guests that ultimately wound up with a cast of like 60 musicians.
Wow.
All but 2 were from North Carolina. Danielle Howell is from South Carolina. She's on it. Bill Lloyd was the other non-North Carolinian, but he's big in the power pop scene, and he's kind of an honorary North Carolinian. So Bill actually sent. What we also wound up doing with this was we started recording a bunch of covers that were kind of had some sort of tie to maybe some substance abuse stuff. But then we wound up recording some songs by North Carolina artists. And so I think the majority of the songs we recorded maybe were by North Carolina artists, but we have other North Carolina artists
Covering it.
sing or play on it too.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty great. We actually wound up, I've been playing drums with Mitch Easter for 14 years now.
Yeah.
And so we wound up, I wound up getting permission from Mitch for us to record a song that we've played a couple times that he's never released.
Oh, wow.
So there's going to be a
cool.
previously unreleased Mitch Easter song on it. And that's the one that Bill Lloyd sang on. And he was a huge
sweet.
Let's Active fan when he was a kid and everything.
Yeah.
So it's really great. So all the money, so the guys that wound up putting together a nonprofit called Abundance NC.
Okay.
And so all the money that's raised from the sales is going to go to Abundance NC, and they've been working with some organizations around North Carolina and an organization in Austin to put together some programs to provide like some real official counseling and help for musicians.
That's awesome.
With substance abuse. And what's also interesting about it is that we started this thing 2 years ago, and then COVID hit, and so that wound up providing like a bunch of interesting challenges,
Right.
to the ability to record it, and also it kind of drove home the point of the record too, because so many people wound up.
Right.
I mean, like, so I think Neil Casal, there's a Neil Casal song on the record, and I think he passed away right around the time we started working on it. But then there's a Justin Townes Earl song on the record, and he didn't make it through the pandemic.
Right.
And so there's some stuff like that really kind of made this whole thing a little more poignant than
Right.
had we not had to deal with it.
Well, I mean, it's such an issue that is, I mean, it's definitely real and in your face, and you see it with friends, and you can see it within yourself. I mean, we were just having a conversation earlier about me going like, okay, I need to slow down this. I need to figure out what I'm doing personally with it. And talking about anything with around drinking or substance abuse problems or anything like that. And I mean, when you're in this environment as a performer, it's a big deal, And so I think that you guys doing something like this is really important. And it's not just, and not saying that it's not a good thing to do it on a larger level, but the fact that y'all are making it so localized, the money that goes into it from a purchase actually, it's going to help somebody in your neighborhood.
Right.
Right. And I think that's awesome. So you said that so with COVID kind of taking a little bit of a problem, did it very much become just like emailing tracks back and forth in a time, or was it like how did you guys kind of, when it crashed for a little bit when everyone had to be locked inside, what was kind of like the first way of, well, how do we deal with this?
Well, the first thing we did was we had a bunch of tracks. Fortunately, we were in a position where we had a bunch of tracks that were sort of ready to be mixed.
Okay.
So the first step was like, okay, I'm just going to mix these at home,
Right.
So I did that, and I closed the studio down for, I think about 4 or 5 months, where I just sort of didn't have anybody in here at all. So I was mixing things at home, and then I was doing some remote drum tracking for people here, but I didn't have anybody else in the building. And then when things seemed like they were lightening up a little bit, my brother's an epidemiologist. So I called him and said, if I was going to start having people back in the building, what are some ways I can safely do that? So he gave me some real good pointers and recommendations. And there's some guidelines that we're still sort of following to make sure that everybody's safe here. But so the first couple of sessions I had back in were with those guys from Winston-Salem, because they had been, they're a little older than me, and they'd been seriously quarantining and really taking care of themselves and everything. So they came back in for a couple of sessions, and then as we started talking about some of the different guests that we were getting on the record, a bunch of them sort of had ways to record at home. So it was easy to send tracks back and forth, and then some of them didn't. So we were able to get Danielle Howell to come up here and do a session, which was nice. But we sent things to Jack Cornell, who's a bass player up in the Triangle area. He's great. He plays with Terry Anderson, and he's got a really nice studio at his place. So a lot of the people up in that area who didn't have home recording setups went and recorded with Jack.
Gotcha.
Which worked out pretty great. Yeah, so there was a lot of just sending things back and forth, and then
that's awesome.
It all came back to me, and then I mixed it all at my house.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy. I started hearing about the project because I went to meet Dan Hood at while he was working at Ground Crew, and this thing that he was working on was on, and he had it up.
Yeah,
he had it up, and he was telling me kind of about the project. And then that got me talking to him about you and being here and stuff. And is that red Telecaster? That used to be his?
That did.
Okay.
Yeah. That
he told me a story that, and you could tell me this is true or not, that you traded or something or bought it from him, and then he came back to you to offer you like the same amount of money, and you're like, nope.
Well,
you're like, or something like that.
Yeah. So that guitar, it's got this sort of crazy Charlotte history, and I've recorded that guitar with everybody who's owned it. So Dave Eatman bought that guitar new at Reliable Music in, I think, 1986.
Okay.
I think it's an 86. I think it's a 62
reissue, right.
But so I think he got an 86, and I recorded it with his college band, essentially. And then he sold it to Jason Scavone.
Yeah.
And I recorded Jason's band with it. And then Jason sold it to Dan, and I recorded it with Dan. Dan had it for years, and I recorded it like a lot. And I kept telling Dan, like, if you ever sell this guitar, I want first dibs on it.
Right.
And I guess he forgot about that or something like that. And then next thing I know, Dan had sold it to Josh Daniel. I was like, man, come on. And then I recorded Josh with it. And I told Josh, if you ever sell that guitar, like, I want first dibs. And then Josh like forgot about that or something. Dan talked Josh into like selling it back to him. So next thing I knew, Dan had it again. And I was like, man, you cannot sell this guitar to anybody else. Like I've had dibs on this thing for a while.
Right.
And I guess it was around the time that I was getting his place.
Which this is very
Dibs.
true. Dibs. Yeah. Musicians, we don't grow up. We just call dibs on instruments instead of, playground stuff.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
It's funny how many of these guitars I got from Dan. He's a good
Well,
source.
it's understandable.
But anything he owns for a long time is great. He's
Right.
got really good taste, and he sort of knows.
Oh, yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So and I've recorded a bunch of.
Yeah,
them
I never
anyway,
play
but-
I never seem to. I always bring a guitar or two whenever I see him, and I end up never playing through any of my stuff. I'm always just like, "What is that?" And he's like, last time I was hanging out with him, I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I keep taking your guitar," and he was like, "Yeah, I'd want to play a vintage Gibson too." I was like, I get it. He's like,
and he's turned me on to so many great pedals and things too.
Yeah.
I mean, and like,
but did that happen at some point? When you bought it from him, did he try to buy it back from you?
he did. There were a couple times where he wanted it back. Yeah, I think ultimately, like, I wound up when I was getting this place open, I traded him like a mic preamp for it.
Right. Okay.
And I was like, man, great. And he was super happy. And then like a couple of years go by, and he's like, man, you think you might want to sell that guitar? And I was like, no way. I was like, anytime you want to borrow it, you can.
Right.
That's the deal with anything I buy from friends. It's like anytime you want to borrow it, if I'm not using it, you're welcome to it.
Gotcha. Okay.
But he did want it sort of building that Hood Rat Telecaster. That's a really great guitar.
It's a killer.
Yes, he's put a lot of time into that, and eventually he told me, he was like, I'm off your back about the red telly, like, because I've got this Hood Rat and it's really great now. So I think he's, but I think if I did decide to sell it, which I'm not going to, I'm sure like he might reconsider, and I'm sure Josh would be like, how much you want for it?
right.
Yeah. So
I mean, being how long have you been in Charlotte?
Let's see. I was born at Presbyterian Hospital in 1973.
Okay.
And aside, I spent 5 years living in South Florida. And aside from that, like I moved back here.
Okay. For some reason, I had it in my mind that you were a Florida kid.
No, I went to college down there, and then
Okay.
when I I went and got a music degree, and when I graduated, I was playing in a band like 5 or 6 nights a week, which is what I wanted to be doing for a living. So it was like, why leave? So I did that for like a year, and then the scene down there started to change. So I moved back up here with the intention of moving to Nashville, actually. But I just got kind of stuck here, but I don't regret it at all.
Well, there's a thing where it's easy to get stuck here, and not in a bad way, because you're like, oh, there is work. Oh, there is good stuff. Oh, there's great musicians. There's great stuff happening, Yeah. And so it's really easy to go, oh, we got to go to where this sort of scene is. And you're like, well, there's something building here, And I would say that you're with this place being is a pivotal part of that. As far as like recording for you, was it always kind of like, I'm the drummer in the band, but I'm also the guy who either kind of gets how recording is, or starting like I can record the band's demos, or did recording start for you a little differently? Or?
No, that was like, in a way, that was kind of it. Like I was sort of interested in it, like in high school. I was in a band in high school with Bruce Hazel from Temperance League and Justin Fairclough from the Houston Brothers, and these two other guys. And we played. We used to play the 4808 Club and the Pterodactyl and some, like, a bunch of Mecklenburg County Teen Center events and things.
Yeah.
And so Justin and the bass player in that band, Joe Wilkie, both had Tascam 4-track recorders, but I was always borrowing them from those guys and recording stuff for that band or for some other bands and things. And I had some things figured out, and then that band, which was called Relayer, went into J. Howard Production Audio in 1989, I think, and we recorded like a little 6-song cassette EP. And the engineer there was a guy named David Floyd, who was a great engineer, and he unfortunately passed away last year. But David was like really great, and he really liked my playing and liked the sound of my drums, so we got along really well. And I got really fascinated. He was the first person I ever saw edit tape to correct something,
Yeah.
To correct maybe like a drum fill that rushed, for example.
Right.
But he did that, and he was the first person I saw use a tape machine for delay, for echo, which was just like mind blowing to me. I didn't know you could do those things as a kid. But he was really good at explaining things. Like I asked him a lot of questions, and he was really patient with me. And one of the questions I asked was, what sort of education do you need to do this? And he said, well, you could do this out of kindergarten. And like, in a way,
in a way, he's right.
Yeah,
in a way,
you
he's
don't
right.
need an official. I don't really have an official education in this.
Right.
So my interest in recording obviously sort of got bigger, and I had a lot of friends and mentors by the time I got a driver's license who were session musicians around town. So it was really common for me, like after school, to like drive over to J. Howard, drive to Studio East, or drive to Audio or whatever, and watch sessions go down for a little bit before I went home and did homework.
Well, when you're in these rooms, you pick up so many little things too, and also not just the technicality of stuff, and we were talking about this earlier when I came in, talking about as far as being unmarked, but just kind of like the correct protocol of kind of how to act in a studio. You figured those things out a lot. Like I know the first time I was interning, I could think back about stuff that I probably did, and I was just like, oh, that was like, that's the worst thing that you could do, or being around in sessions, or is it your session, is it not your session, is vastly important, and I think it's so good to kind of pick those things up at a younger age. I feel like you probably And I'm not saying anything about anybody who does have an education, and I have an education in this stuff. That's where my college degree is. But I do think that you pick up so much more from just if you can have a correct in at a actual facility. You learn so much more, especially about just the things that can't really be taught as far as like, this is the correct protocol of this is how we act in this situation.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, it's a big thing. And I remember the first time I ever saw like a real, like serious Nashville type session, and it was at the old White Room, you know, which is now GAT3, and it was like Tony Kreisman and Tim Smith and a bunch, and probably either Richard Putnam or Mark Stallings, but some really great session players around here. And I remember watching that stuff go down where, you know, the session leader had the demo on a boombox and would play it for everybody, and everybody had their notepad, and they would write a chart as they were listening to the demo. One time through, they'd have their chart written. They'd go out. They'd go for a take. They'd get the first take it'd sound like a record.
Yeah.
And it would be like, okay, who's got overdubs next? And Richard would switch from the piano to the organ, you know, and the guitar player would pick up an acoustic, and it was like so quick and unbelievable. And you know, and if somebody made a mistake, they knew exactly where it was. You know, they all had charts, you know. So, you know, the bass player would be like, I need to get the first 3 measures of the bridge or whatever. And they would do another pass. And it was great because it was on a Studer 2-inch machine where you could arm tracks as the tape's rolling, you know. So you could punch in by arming the track. So you could do another pass. Right. And you could get the organ then, and you could get the acoustic guitar. And, you know, and in I think Tony had like an octopad, so he was doing some percussion things. And then like, oh yeah, you need to get the bass at the top of the bridge. So you just arm that track at the top of the bridge, and 3 measures after you disarm it. And you finish your pass, and then it's like, boom, next song.
That's something I remember talking to somebody about. I was about to say recently, but this past 2 years, it could have been 5 years ago. Who knows? But the art of the punch in a studio, and like how important that was. I mean, even to like the physical art of punching in when this bar is here and punching out, so that way it completes. Whereas, you know, we can highlight that section in the grid and say we want it to play 2 bars out. And, you know, it's so much easier to do, you know, in Pro Tools these days. But like the art of doing that, even on like an ADAT machine, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Where you don't have the visual, or before, like I need to punch that part, you don't go, hold on, let me highlight exactly what needs to be punched in. I mean, like a tape operator who could do that. That used to be your in. Oh yeah, you know, well, like if you can punch in and out, dude, you got a job. Yeah. You know, almost.
And there's that classic mistake that everybody makes like one time where you like
wipe everything.
Where you've got, you know, you record the take with the whole band, and then the bass player's like, great, I need to just punch the top of the bridge or whatever. It's like, great. And you roll back and you go and you hit record, and you realize all the tracks are still on.
Without unarming everything.
And the bass player's playing. It's like go and you get to the top of the bridge and you hit record and you hear nothing but bass, and then you just melt right there. Right. I made that mistake once.
Sorry, guys.
The modern day equivalent of that, I guess, was the band brought in a hard drive. I was interning a place in Burlington or whatever. And honestly, I shouldn't have been running this. To be fair, I'm not going to say where it was, but I had no business running the session. It was very much like the person who put me in charge of the session was like, I'm going to go get a burger or go do something. You know what I mean? Right. And the hard drive space was full. And so I'm trying to think of how we can do that. You know, so I go over and I go to, erase all unused tracks from the session, you know, just to clear up anything like that. And of course it was like, do you want to commit to this, or do you want unused tracks, or do you want all track or whatever, you know? And I was just like, this option, you know, and then just the screen goes plop. And it was, just like you say, like you do that once.
What did you mean unused tracks?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, I was using these. I could see it. Yeah, nothing makes you just feel this small, you know, to hear that. And I mean, I think everyone has that story, you know, to some extent, you know. And I think it's good to get that a little bit
as long as you do it once.
As long as you do it once. Well, this is why I produce instead of engineer. I've done it more times than I should.
Got to hit record.
Right. Yeah, no, I just stand around and act like I know what I do, and while I let the professionals do it. So with that, so you're kind of getting the interest, and you're being around studios and stuff. When do you open Old House. And Old House, I'd never got to see the original location. Was that just kind of at your house or just this old house?
No,
or?
so when I moved back here, I wound up sort of lying my way into a job at the Playroom. When the Playroom was originally on Graham Street. It was at the corner of 10th and Graham. The building isn't there anymore. But okay. But Eddie Z was the short version is that I was in a band with Eddie. I joined a band that Eddie Z was putting together.
Yeah.
And he was nice enough to sort of give me a shot as an assistant engineer. And I knew enough to sort of make it work, and then like learn enough from him to really make it work. And of course, I was playing gigs around, so I knew a ton of musicians.
Right.
So people were coming to me to record, and so I worked for him for I guess about 3 years, and then went over to work at Studio East for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
There. So I was like one of the last guys who was lucky enough to have like a staff engineering job at
right.
2 different studios, and then when I quit the job at Studio East.
And around what time would that have been?
I quit Studio East in spring of 2002.
Yeah, so you're right.
Yeah, so it's like late 90s was kind of
you're
like
right.
when I started.
That era is when
it's 2000s. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So when I quit the job at Studio East, I had a good client base, and I just started doing freelance work. So I was doing most of my work out of J. Howard Production Audio, ironically, where my high school band had recorded, and then. Did some things at the Sound Farm and Art Bordeaux's place, and up at Epiphonic in Lenore, and at GAT3, and just a bunch of different places. But I guess Old House had opened in '98, and I'd sort of heard a little bit about it, but didn't really know about it. So I asked Rob Preston, who's like kind of the studio tech du jour around town. I asked Rob, so what's that place like? And Rob's like, oh, it's cool. It's small, but it's nice. So I called David Black, who was the guy who had built it originally.
Oh, okay.
And talked to him about doing some work out there. And so I worked out there for a few years, and then unfortunately, like David passed away in 2005.
Oh wow. Okay.
So the story was that that house had been built in 1873 on his wife's. It had been his wife's great grandfather's.
1873.
Yeah, 1873 to 1875 is how long the construction took. And
sounds like it was an old house.
It was.
Right.
It was an old house. That's where the name comes from.
I was about to
this
say.
isn't in a house. It's not that old. Yeah. But ultimately, like it had been vacant for like 20 or 30 years by 1998 or 96, I guess, was when David sort of got the idea to turn it into a studio. He had married into that family and saw this vacant house next door to his house and thought, man, maybe we can make this a cool studio. So they got permission from the family. They had to do a bunch of renovation to make sure the house was sound. And then they turned the inside of it into what was a really cool studio. Again, not very big, but it was well equipped, and the rooms all sounded good. And David was like a really nice guy, really, really cool. And so I did a bunch of freelance work out there and really liked it. And then and David had a business partner named Scott Applegate, who was a guitar player. And so when David passed away, Scott and David's wife asked me initially to finish working on some stuff that David had been working on. And then that just sort of turned into some conversations about keeping the place open. So I ran it for them for like 8 years. And then they just sort of decided like that primarily Janet Black decided that she wanted to just sort of move on with her life and didn't want to deal with having a business next door to her house and everything like that. So, but the studio had a good reputation and it was my livelihood. So it was like, well, what can I do to keep this afloat? So I negotiated with her for a couple of years. They gave me like a couple of years to try and get some money saved up and to find a space and everything. And there were a bunch of ups and downs with that. But ultimately, I found this space in early 2013. And
now this space, so I good friends with Will Krause and Jim Safran.
Oh, okay, right.
So
gotcha.
Help me kind of piece some of this together. And what's funny is I knew Jim Safran, and I met Will at a Christmas party that you invited me to here, your annual Christmas thing that you have.
Oh, right.
And that's where I met Will.
Okay.
Was that. So I just pieced that together. I was like, oh, the first time I ever met Will was here. But they had, was this their facility originally, or I'm trying to, because they were doing an internet thing. Right.
Yeah, it was originally built when this business park was built in '96. this space was originally built to be a recording studio.
Correct.
Like it was never offices. It was never converted. I mean, so the studio was designed by a guy named Doug Hawthorne, who had been an engineer around Charlotte. He was a bass player and an engineer, and he had worked at Studio East years ago and stuff like that too. And so Doug, Doug's a kind of a mad scientist, brilliant sort of guy. So he did all this research on like BBC specifications for acoustic design and all this kind of stuff, and built this space really correctly. It's one of the more properly built studios in town, actually.
Yes.
So there are no parallel surfaces,
no parallel walls. Your ISO booths are perfect.
Yeah,
you can throw a kit in there or not. They're
which
is massive to have that option.
This ISO booth didn't exist.
Really?
When it was built as Pendulum, this was a loading door.
Okay.
But by the time I got in here, it hadn't been a studio for like 5 years.
Okay.
And someone had taken a Sawzall and had just cut this giant hole in the wall right there. Not sure why. So we wound up, a good friend of mine, a guy named Joshua Morris, is a studio designer up in New York and works for Walter Stork Design Group. And so he helped me with the design of that booth and with some of the acoustic treatment I did in here.
Gotcha.
And so we built that booth. We, again, sort of sawed out. We decided to bring it out a little bit, so we made sure we had room for the piano in there, sawed out the floor, and then built that booth to the same spec as the rest of the building. So the external wall for this booth doesn't touch the internal wall. Nothing about inside that booth touches this room.
Right.
That booth doesn't touch this room. The control room doesn't touch this room. And, it's all steel stud construction, but there's an internal structure that's independent of the external structure.
And that right there, to me, is always one of the easiest ways to explain when somebody says, like, I can go to Guitar Center and spend $300, or I can record a song on my phone right now. Why would I want to go to a studio? That is massive.
Because you don't know what you're doing.
Well, that's a massive.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
That's a massive part of it. I think people tend to kind of go, yeah, I can figure it out. The other thing is gear. Sometimes, it's kind of a thing, and then people kind of go like, oh, my gear's pretty good. But really, one of the really big things with that is in what you just said, as far as the construction of these rooms, how well sealed that room is. And how treated it is, because it kind of goes back to exactly what you just said at the beginning. It's, the microphone's important, sure. The gear's important, sure. But like, what's the performance? What does it sound like in that room? And how is that performer doing it? This room is literally made for performance and recording of that performance. Same as that room and that room and that room, and that,
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is so overlooked in studio builds, studio design, saying that you have a studio and all that, like it's really important the way that everything is kind of that you have here, and it's also good to have a little lounge area that's completely separate, so that way when, say, your saxophone player hates the way that you communicate with him, you can go back and say the ISO booth, and he can go in the lounge.
I can go way out there and just completely and totally not pay attention
and
to what
not have
Todd
to
says.
listen to said singer. At all, like completely at all. We're not talking about any of this from experience. Nope. But anyway, that's just a really important point that I think of. Like, it goes to show when I think people ask that question, they go, how is this even a viable business model? It obviously is.
Well, it's so easy these days, right? For somebody to have the perception that they're making a great video or a great audio recording somewhere with the tools that they have available, right? But at the end of the day, if you stack them up beside something that's been done in a professional space
by professionals,
by a professional who has the experience, I mean, the quality is always it's just never going to be the same,
right.
And it's something that is important. You're 100% correct.
Yeah. So anyway, didn't mean to sidetrack there, but I think that goes to kind of show exactly what's so cool about what you're doing here with this space.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that was really important to me when I had sort of had this idea, this grand scheme of opening a studio like years ago. And I'm glad I didn't. I mean, I'm glad I did it when I did, because I don't think I would have known enough to make it work,
Gotcha.
I'm still not sure I know enough to make it work. But, I didn't want to just sort of find a space with a low ceiling that I could throw some foam up on and call it a studio or whatever. Like, I mean, like with more and more people recording at home, the question does sort of become like, well, why would I go to a studio? And it's, you know, like I thought about that a lot. And, and of course I mean, you know, there are some obvious things. I mean, like I've been doing this almost every single day since February of 1997. And that's got to count for something, but also like,
That's no, just go ahead.
But I mean, like, you know, like I wanted a space that was big enough to record. Like, I mean, I've done an 18-piece jazz big band in here. I've done a couple records for an 18-piece jazz big band in here, and I've had string ensembles in here, and I've had choirs in here, and all that kind of stuff. And so, like, I wanted a space that was big enough to accommodate something like that.
Right.
I wanted a space that was in a location where a band could be in here making noise at midnight, and no one's going to complain about it. And
which is massive.
You know, yeah, and I wanted a space that was big enough for everybody to be able to set up and see each other comfortably and have a good sounding headphones set up and all this kind of stuff. I wanted a grand piano, which we didn't have space for at the old studio because I'm pretty involved in the jazz community and I do a lot of jazz recording. And so piano seemed like a logical thing. So like I spent 3 years trying to buy that specific piano from the guy I bought it from. Like I really was after that piano.
Right.
So I mean, I got like a really great piano. I've got a, you know, good Hammond organ, and then this kind of nice collection of stuff that I've got space for.
Right.
That my wife is grateful now that I have space for, because the period in between studios, it was kind of ugly for a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like I wanted this kind of stuff that you know, that's sort of difficult to get at home.
Right.
You know, and stuff that why would somebody pay for studio time? Well, if they're going to pay for studio time, then having access to like a nice grand piano in a big space like this where everybody can play at the same time and not worry about what time of day it is or whatever. And then maybe like, you know, pick up the electric 12-string guitar for an overdub or the little combo organ or whatever. Like there's
whatever's
some oddball
needed.
things. Yeah, that you can sort of have fun with. You know, some stuff that you might. I mean, I've got
Right.
a Les Paul and the Marshall and some normal stuff, but there's also some oddball stuff here that you know, you might stumble on.
What's an oddball thing you have? What's an oddball thing that you got here?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I could just turn around and look. Well, so I've got an electric baritone guitar. That's like
I was looking at your at your Danny.
Yeah, that Dan Electro U2, which gets a lot of use, and it's. I mean, a lot of times people get confused by it because it's tuned down to A, so you have to sort of
as soon as,
modify your thinking. But it's amazing how often it might kind of be like, oh, you know, well this chorus should get bigger. It's like, well, if you figure out the chords on the baritone, you overdub that, and then it's like, you know, or like a single note thing, or you can double that with the piano. Or I've got this weird little spin it piano too. That's a 64 key, like almost sort of short upright thing that I have specifically tuned out of tune. Like every other string is out of tune.
I was here for Colby played it on a session.
Oh yeah, Colby's used that a fair amount. Yeah, it's a cool little.
It sounds
piano.
fantastic.
Yeah, and I think I'm doing a Temperance League record right now, and they're talking about making use of that. I think when they're in like next week or the week after or something.
Yeah.
Like that. So
well, very cool.
Yeah. So I mean, those are a couple of oddball things. I mean, I've got, you know, some oddball microphones and oddball outboard gear, and then of course in the drum and percussion department that gets a little.
All right, so here's the
silly
fun
too.
game. Here's the fun game.
What you got?
It's the what mic would you use game.
Oh, I love this.
Okay.
I love this.
What
okay.
mic would you use game?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So earlier you talked about recording a big band.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
We set the drums up in that isolation booth, and we had upright and electric bass on stuff. So we had the bass in there, and then we had the piano and guitar over here. We had packing blankets over the top of the piano and had packing blankets over the guitar amp. And then we had the horns set up here in kind of a U shape. So the trombones were over here, and the trumpets were here, and the saxophones were all along here. So everybody could see.
So everybody's performing
Everybody could
at
see
once,
everybody.
watching each other.
Yep.
And you're still having the drums isolated, even though the drummer could still be a part of the band, and everything's still.
Yeah, and the main reason why I did that, and why, like, I use isolation booths on jazz sessions a lot, and I know if you think about like classic Blue Note recordings or whatever, they weren't done that way, but this is.
But if they had
this
it, they
isn't
would have probably used it.
1958.
Right.
Well, I mean, like,
I mean, you know what I mean?
yeah. Well,
if they had Pro Tools, they would have done a hell of a lot more editing too. You know.
Well, yeah. Well, but it just depends. It's like people play differently now, and it's
Right.
like I mean,
They do.
drums are made louder, cymbals are made louder.
Right.
People are still using old upright basses, which aren't very loud, and so and piano players don't play as loud as they used to, and everything. So, if you, especially in a room that's as lively as this, like if you put drums in this room with piano, you'll never all you'll get in the piano mics or drum. You'll get real distant drum sound.
Yeah.
So that's part of that. But also, like, I sort of like really modern sounding jazz records. Like, I mean, like a lot of that stuff that came out of Avatar, a lot of the later ECM stuff. I really like. I like the sound of it. It's really clean and really distinct, and that's hard to get in a room like this.
Has to be very isolated.
Sort of, like in a way. I mean, obviously, like if you're doing a jazz record, you're not going to like do a take of the drums and then have the guy overdub the bass and the guy overdub the piano. I mean, like, jazz record is really all about the interaction. So you need to be able to see and hear each other and play live. But my preference in sounds is for sounds that are a little more contained when it comes to that style of recording. Now, when it's rock stuff, man, like I
Throw
love
everything
the
in.
drums
Yeah,
right here.
your drum. Yeah, I was about to say you have. This is very much the great thing about your room is like this. It reminds me similar to like the Sound City documentary. This is where drums sit in this room.
Usually,
It's
like,
yeah.
Actually, here is not bad too. Like I play drums here too for it's a different sort of thing.
Okay.
But in general, yeah, like kind of that. And I've
It's
tried
just killer there.
done like the corner, and I've done kind of up near here and everything. I've tried a bunch of different things, but I really like sort of the drummer's back to the control room glass, playing out in this way, and that also works sort of ergonomically for the band. Like if I've got somebody doing scratch vocal, they can see the drummer, and typically we might isolate amps. And if somebody needs to do feedback or something, they'll go in with the amps, or they really want to be in with the amps, I'll have them in there. But otherwise, I might have sort of all the members of the band out here with the drums, but their instruments would be isolated. Right. And if someone's doing a scratch vocal, they'd be in that booth. But that way, everybody can sort of see each other and hear each other with the headphones on.
Yeah. And so one thing just to kind of tie back to that kind of made me think of, like, when you're talking about that with rock bands and stuff, like, your room. How do you kind of try to read a band or read an artist or read kind of what somebody's needing and then decide suggesting placing the drums out here or in there, for example? Like, is it like, what's kind of in your thought process when somebody, calls you up about it? What's one of the first things that you look for?
Well, I mean, I usually have a conversation with them about what they're going for.
Right.
And usually bands, like, they've got some kind of idea, or if they really seem like they don't know what they sound like, like I might ask, like, what kind of bands do you guys listen to, or what records have you been listening to lately that you really like the sound of, or whatever. And, I mean, like, for instance, like the Temperance League, the last record I did for them, Dust Parade album, they've been listening to Wildflowers a lot.
Right.
And so, and for me, like, a lot of the sound of a recording is dictated by the sound of the drums, because the drums take up so much space in the frequency spectrum, and the ambience dictates a lot of what the other stuff sounds like. So like on Wildflowers, there's a lot of kind of room mic, not like mega power station compressed room mic, but just something kind of like, those drums aren't disco drums, So we did that record with the drums out here and some room mics up and all that kind of stuff. And then again, guitar amps isolated, and Bruce did a scratch vocal for that stuff. And then, but on this recent stuff, they, again, the Tom Petty references, but they mentioned Damn the Torpedoes, but they also mentioned David Bowie's Hunky Dory and the Plastic Ono Band album, and those are all pretty, like, from a really analytical standpoint, those drum sounds are all really different.
Yeah.
But they're all dry, fat drum sounds.
Dry, fat 70s Ivine style Jimmy or
yeah,
whatever.
I mean, Damn the Torpedoes is kind of like the benchmark for that sound. Like, I think, and
Yeah.
So we set DK up in that booth, and DK always just plays my drums because he likes whatever I've got. He knows if we have a conversation about whatever he's into, and he plays with so many bands that I record, Mike Strauss. And
You have a
those
really
different
good
people.
relationship with him.
Yeah. So it's easy to have, he's just like, here's what we've been thinking about, whatever you feel like setting up,
Right.
So I'll sort of go through whatever drums I've got, and set up what I think is appropriate, hopefully sort of tune him before he gets here for the right thing. And then when he gets here, we might play with a couple different things, but that's kind of what we did for this last batch of things for them too. So it's a completely different drum sound from the last record.
Wow.
But it was dictated by what they've been listening to and the type of songs
Yeah.
they're writing. So that would be even with a band, especially with a band I don't know, like I would have these conversations like, what are you going for? What are your expectations? And again, for me, it kind of starts with the drums. So I might ask the drummer, like, do you want to bring your own drums, or are you expecting to play what I've got? And if you're expecting to play what I've got, then what are you thinking? Because I've got 9 sets of drums and 30 snare drums.
Well, right. Well, I mean, I remember, and your kick drums too. I remember when we were doing Mike's record. I think it was that one over there in the Let Week. I can't remember the guy's name.
Oh, he had that guy from Nashville.
The
That came
Nashville
to play.
kid.
Yeah,
God,
Sean something. He was really good.
Yeah, he was very good. He was
Yeah.
very, very good. And that was to Mike's credit as well. That was definitely Mike's call, which was exactly the right move.
Yeah.
And it was just getting the sound from the drums that you had and provided and your expertise from it. And it sounded fantastic, and that is such a departure of like the 70s. The big area Americana. We don't want the drums to be in the way, but we almost want them to be the decay to be as long as a pad, just
Right. Yeah.
kind of, kick drums kind of thing, like versus, the other 3 to 4 drum sounds that we're describing. And that's, and I think that's really, when we talk about the gear and the things that you have, it's the expertise, but it's also knowing like, okay, this here fills in the gap of if somebody calls and says, I want to do an esoteric polka band. You're like, cool. Okay. So do you want this, I've got that in the corner, might not pull it out that much, but I've got it,
Right. But I'll also probably like run out and listen to some polka bands if it's stuff like, I mean, because also like, I mean, like there are certain types of music that I record a lot that I think I'm pretty good at, and that stuff is all kind of obvious, but, and there are certain things that I just don't do because I don't know much about it. And I'm not like a lot of really heavily electronic music. I just sort of don't, just don't do. I've never gotten deep into that.
Right. And it's not out of like dislike or disdain. No. It's the obvious thing of just kind of going like, there's someone who does this way better than I can.
Yeah, totally. And I just don't, it's like I don't know a lot about it. And as such, I have not equipped the studio for that kind of thing.
Right.
So we don't have like a lot of soft synths in the computer and all this kind of stuff. Right. Like, it's more like, you bring it to us and we'll record it.
Well, and that also kind of goes back too with the the thing is talking about studio. I think you do a very good job of being an interconnective studio. Somebody can do the work that needs to be done here and then do some of the work at home or do some of the work in another studio. You're very open to collaboration. And so, especially when I've talked to you before about some of this stuff and the project that's coming out is very much that way. And I think that's a really good mindset to have in this day and age. There's
Absolutely,
still, there's still studios that I know who will charge different rates depending on what you're using, even if it's the same time slot. Like, for example, if you're completing your record there or not, or just doing drum tracks there and taking it somewhere else, will upcharge you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
that sounds like this real like LA 1985 sort of thing. And
that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we basically we have a higher rate for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday only because for a lot of years it got to a point where like that was all that bands were booking because people have jobs and whatnot. So, and we've only had a couple of rate increases over the years, and they've been small. So it's essentially been, have the rate increase, but have the rate increase on the weekend to incentivize people to record Monday through Thursday. And that's worked out pretty well because some people who can do it are like, oh, we'll get a deal if we record on those days. And so it's wound up balancing out things very nicely. But so we've got that. And then the only other thing that we charge for is that we just require that you have the piano tuned before your session.
Right.
Other than that, again, it's like going back to that real, when studios were $3,000 a day and
Right.
record budgets were $150,000. You know, like, oh, you want to use that Vox AC30? Well, that's going to be another $50 a day. Like,
Right.
there's none of that here. You
Yeah.
know, if you want to use our Telefunken U47, like, man, sing into it. That's what it's
Yeah.
here for. And it's the same thing with our drums and all this kind of stuff. Even though that's, you know, like Remo makes so much money off of me every year.
Oh, for drum heads.
Drum
Oh, God, I
heads
can
for
imagine.
9 sets of drums that people use constantly. But I don't charge extra for, you know, I don't charge
Right.
extra for using that kind of stuff. And to me, it's a little weird. But also, I mean, I just sort of think, I mean, it's like, it's 2021 and we're like comfortably 20 years into dealing with studios should be interfacing with home recording. And I like,
Right.
Yeah,
And I think you do such a good job of that. And I think to me, it surprises me that there still are some places that do that, which is a completely different conversation, but it's great to see somebody who's done it so well for so long. You know, I mean, it is, if you got everyone who's ever put out a record in Charlotte, there's no way that one of the people standing in your immediate vicinity didn't do their record here. You know what I mean? And it's, you know, and it's not about, you know, competition with any other studio. I don't mean it in that way because all these other studios are fantastic. Yeah. And many records have been done here and there. But I think the fact that you just have interfaced with it so well, it's I don't know, man. It's just always a joy to be in this building. It's just always a joy and a fun thing. And I know that I'm not the only one who thinks that way. So I just, you know, I've two things to say. I really appreciate you having us here and thank you for doing this. And,
Absolutely.
And we're gonna throw up links and everything for the album and stuff.
Awesome.
Which is really cool. But last quick question, talking about drum sounds.
Yeah.
What's your favorite drum sound of all time on a record?
oh man,
Or just one of?
a loaded question, right?
It's a very loaded. One of the first
I
ones
have
that comes
a hard
up.
time with favorites, but a couple years ago, a few years ago now, I actually went and did a clinic at Blackbird Academy in Nashville,
Mm-hmm.
and Mark Rubel, who teaches there, has been a friend of mine for ages. Mark asked me to bring like three examples of drum sounds I really loved. So I brought Revolution by Los Lobos, which is the first song on Colossal Head.
Okay.
If you don't know that record is mind-blowing, game-changing, every possible cliche term you could throw at. Like, absolutely fantastic record. I've turned so many people onto that record. So the first song on that is just like what? The other one, another one I brought was Shining in the Light from the Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, Walking in the Clarksdale record from '98 or whatever it was. Steve Albini recorded that at Rack in England. Most of that album was done at Abbey Road. That song was done at Rack, and I could tell you what microphones they used and stuff. Like I know all about that
I need
record.
to get that record.
But that
Especially, I didn't know Albini did that.
Yeah, he did.
Or
yeah.
I didn't know that like I didn't even know that record existed.
Yeah, I mean, it was a big deal when it came out because it was like the first time Jimmy Page and Robert Plant had worked together like since Led Zeppelin. And that was around the time that they were doing like the live stuff on MTV. They did the acoustic. It was great. And
I remember seeing that.
Yeah, that guy Michael Lee was the drummer who passed away. He was great. And yeah, like that record is not without its flaws, but I really love it, and I love the drum sound on that first song, and it's kind of indicative of the Albini thing, which I like.
Which I mean it's great.
Yeah. And then the other one was Secret Journey by the Police, which was on Ghost in the Machine, and that was Hugh Padgham engineered that at the Air Studios Montserrat down in the Caribbean. And I think that I just love the way the drums sound on that. I'm a huge Stuart Copeland nut anyway, but I love the way the drums sound on that. There's something really compelling and in your face about them that I really like.
Oh well, dude, I'm doing so much research right now. I'm gonna go like listen to all of that now.
I mean, you can't discount like Ticket to Ride like that. That's a great drum sound or
but just something that
whatever
kept, it's
and the early ZZ Top records sound great in this again, that super dry.
Right. But there's just something that, the reason I just thought of that question is because one of my favorites that I always come back to is the You Don't Know How It Feels from Wildflowers.
Yeah, that's a cool, mid-rangey,
I really love "Fool in the Rain."
Oh,
Yeah. It's-
Well,
it's-
I'm talking about
the room
any
sound.
of the Zeppelin catalog.
but specifically for that song, especially when coming out of the guitar solo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
it's and I know it's typical Bonham, like bombastic and like all that stuff, but still, like it's to me like that's just the way it sounds.
Yeah.
It's I feel like that kind of like tonality of his drum in that song is the easiest way to almost explain like this is what he does. That's not just a straight rock beat. Like it's such a good way,
Right.
it's such a good like introduction to him as a drummer in a way. That is a good one.
He was so good. I mean, just like so good at so many things. And he's like one of the most revered, like highly touted drummers on the planet. And he's still like kind of underrated in a way,
Right.
He's like, he's that good,
Right.
He really was. And, and all those records all sound great. And it's funny because you can say something about the John Bonham drum sound and everybody knows what you're talking about, even though all of those records sound vastly different.
Oh, yeah.
Especially
They do.
like from
Absolutely.
the first one to the last one.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a dramatic change in how the drums were mic'd and how they were tuned and all this kind of
Right.
stuff. But it's still him. You know what you know
Because
what
it goes
you
back
mean.
to your point you were saying earlier, before the microphones, it's the person and how they're performing in the room that they're in.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But dude, well, I don't think I could have planned that any better. Just bring it full circle.
John Bonham. We'll
Bonham.
wrap on John Bonham. Perfect.
Dude, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. It was
Yeah.
really great.
Thanks, Chris.
And there you go. That was Chris. That was me, Jay, and Chris. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you, Chris, for doing that with us. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast. You may be wondering when the next episode will be. We'll be honest with you. There's a few things scheduled for this year, but not much. We got a couple surprises up our sleeves, but then we're really just kind of gearing up for some new announcements for next year. So make sure to subscribe and stick around. Check out our website, makingnoisepod.com, and the merch store. Send us emails at makingnoisepod@gmail.com, and we'll see you guys soon. Thank you.